Hey everybody, it's Nick from Android Headlines, and today we're going to be spectators in the face-off between the Neato Bot Vac Connected and the iRobot Roomba 980 in the Vacuum Wars. Alright, so that was a bit cheesy, sorry, but keeping your home clean and giving you peace of mind is really serious business. That's what the latest round of smart vacuums promises, but which one does it best? iRobot and Neato are two of the biggest names in the robot vacuum business, and each company has a very different way of doing things. Design and operation is very different for both of these robot vacuums, and we're here to put these philosophical and design differences to the test and see which scenarios each vacuum does the best in. First, we're going to take a look at some logic tests to see how each vacuum navigates the rooms they're put in. Our first test is just a simple spot clean test. Both vacuums actually feature a spot clean button right on the top of the vacuum, and this is to give consumers easy and quick access to cleaning for areas where something might have been spilled or something to that effect. Both vacuums treat this mode incredibly differently though, and you're going to see that right now. Starting off with the iRobot Roomba 980, which literally spot cleans in a circular targeted area. This usually works rather well for a small 1 meter or about 3 foot diameter circle, but when obstacles come into play, the Roomba has a harder time navigating around its targeted ring pattern. We've sped up the video to keep you from boredom during the test, but you'll see as it moves that it never actually reaches past the table. Instead, it just turns around and completes what it can of its target circle. While this clearly is a design pattern rather than any kind of navigation issue, the odds that you have a spill in a single, perfectly shaped circle are probably pretty rare, and having obstacles to clean around is more than a regular occurrence. The side brush on the Roomba actually does a great job of pushing the dirt inward, and iRobot has designed this so that it actually moves inward towards the brush so that anything that's pushed inward should be sucked up as the Roomba moves back inward and towards that circular motion. Moving on to the Neato, you can immediately see how different the Neato considers the definition of spot clean to be. Rather than just clean in a single circular spot, the Neato actually goes out and hunts for the area it's in to clean up the mess you've placed it by. Using that laser-guided navigation system found in the top of the vacuum, the Bot Vac Connected moves intelligently around the legs of the table. It even goes a bit further out just to make sure any stray particles from the spill get picked up. Remember, this is only measuring methodology, not the actual performance of the vacuum just yet, so in that regard, the Neato Bot Vac Connected absolutely wins. There might be situations where the smaller radius of the Roomba 980 is a preferable way to clean a specific spot, but being able to also move around obstacles in the way while still cleaning that entire spot gives the Bot Vac a significant advantage. In this second test, we move along to a room that's filled with obstacles. Of course, my kitchen doesn't normally have this much stuff littered all over the floor, but for the sake of the test, we figured it would frame nicely for placing various obstacles in the way. The idea behind this test was to see how each vacuum performs when given a number of obstacles that it needs to clean around. More often than not, my 2-year-old hides toys or two under a couch or even just in the middle of the floor, and I need to make sure that my robot vacuum won't trip up on such hazards. Starting with the Roomba, we see that the logic of the vacuum works in a way that it tries to cover the middle of the room first, working its way in straight lines from one end of the room to the other until it reaches the far side. After it's fully mapped out the room, it then goes back and makes a second and sometimes even third pass to specifically grab everything on the sides and corners of the room. The camera on top actually sees objects and helps it slow down before bumping into them, but it still seems to primarily rely on the bumper on the front to map things out. Notably, the Roomba completely missed the pantry on the right side of the kitchen, although this may be more due to weird anomalies that happen sometimes with the virtual walls that iRobot has made to keep the Roomba out of certain areas or rooms that you don't want them in. These walls were set up for line-of-sight blocking, so having them set up in this particular spot behind the wall really should not have blocked the Roomba from cleaning the pantry. The biggest positive here is that the Roomba's design keeps it from sucking up most objects and getting stuck on them. It'll usually just push something out of the way and then go on its merry way to finish the room. Moving on to the Neato Bot Vac Connected, we can see that it works very differently from the Roomba. Starting by mapping out the room in the beginning with a little spin, it moves towards the most open part, only to be abruptly stopped by the barriers we've placed down for it. These barriers aren't quite as well designed as the Roomba's virtual walls, and unfortunately often get moved or pushed around unless they're placed in places that keep them more steady. On the bright side though, they aren't going to suffer from those weird projection anomalies like we saw earlier with the Roomba's virtual walls, where it kept the Roomba out of the pantry even though it wasn't blocking it. The logic for the Bot Vac is also very different from the Roomba, and you'll find that the Bot Vac actually does the opposite from the Roomba's navigation by starting at the edges of the room first and working its way inward. A negative here of the Bot Vac's design is that it tends to suck up larger objects than the Roomba would because of its mechanically hinged legs, which extend to bring the rear up in an attempt to suck up more stuff near the corners of the room. If you pay close attention, you'll see that a lone Mega Man figurine keeps making its way under the Bot Vac almost the entire time as it wanders around the kitchen. While watching, it seems that the Bot Vac might be going slower. It actually finishes in nearly half the time of the Roomba, thanks to the more intelligent navigation provided by that laser guidance system. It even gets in that pantry that the Roomba missed too, and under more areas like the desk and the chair than the Roomba was able to. On top of that, it was actually able to get the little bits under the chair that the Roomba left, something like a cherry on top, if you will. The Neato Bot Vac Connected is a clear winner here, even if it did drag around that Mega Man figure for quite a while. Now for test 3, which is the first of our performance tests. This one's going to be dirt on tile, so you won't likely have a quarter cup of dirt in any single area of your house at any given time, but just in case you drop a flower pot or something similar to that, we're going to take a look and see which vacuum cleans that sort of spill up the best. For this test, we made sure to use garden soil so that there were plenty of little bits in there like roots and other things to make it more difficult for the vacuums to suck up, since messes in the real world simply aren't uniform or easy in any way. This time around, we'll start off with the Neato, which, as you may remember from previous tests, starts out by cleaning the perimeter and works its way inward. The area is clearly mapped out in a very geometric pattern, and the Bot Vac Connected does a really great job of evenly covering every square inch of floor space around the area, even perfectly around that little doorstop instead of straight smashing into it. What it doesn't do a great job of, though, is getting the dirt out of those grout lines from the tile, an area that's slightly recessed from the rest of the tile. I'm actually surprised by this, given that the Bot Vac Connected uses actual brushes instead of a silicone rubber type of roller like the Roomba does, but regardless, in the end it simply doesn't clean up all that dirt, even though there's no obvious physical obstacles or other problems in its way. All in all, this took about 10 minutes to finish. Moving on to the Roomba, it actually took a good 2 minutes for it to figure out the room space we laid out for the test, but once it got acquainted, we can see the same pattern of before, where it runs through the middle of the room first, followed by the edges. Multiple passes are the Roomba's specialty, and you can see right here that the Roomba's dirt detection sensor was tripped, and it makes multiple passes by backing up and going forward again until it feels the surface is properly cleaned. These multiple passes are what ultimately make all the difference, and the Roomba tries to get a specific area clean before it moves on, unlike the Neato, which just tries its best to cover the whole room in multiple passes and in one shot. The Roomba takes an extra minute here, though, only because it had a hard time getting acquainted with its surroundings in this artificial test environment. But if it hadn't had this period of confusion, it would have actually finished a minute before the Bot Vac. Taking a look at the results, we see that the Roomba only left behind a few larger specks, meaning that at least 95% of the dirt placed on the ground of the test was picked up. The Roomba definitely won here, no doubt. Our fourth test is similar to the last one, however, we're going to be using leaves here instead of dirt. This presents a uniquely different obstacle than dirt, as it's much larger and more rigid, and is likely something you'll find scattered in front of your outside-facing doors more often than a pile of dirt would be. The Roomba's side brush design is quite different from that of the Bot Vacs, and tends to do a better job of pushing stuff towards the center of the vacuum, although there's plenty of times here where leaves and other particles get tossed elsewhere instead. The pattern here seems a lot more random than the last few tests, though, and it's difficult to tell exactly where it's going to go next. Those virtual wall barriers that iRobot has made for the Roomba series seem to work considerably better than the Bot Vacs in this scenario too, as I found myself constantly having to adjust the Bot Vacs barriers during the video, while the Roombas just did their job and stayed where they needed to. At the end of the session, we see that the Roomba cleaned all but 2 leaves, a number that means it picked up again about 95% of stuff left on the floor, and it finished in just under 8 minutes. From the sound of things, the Neato appears to mostly grind the leaves as it sucks them in, likely helping to make more room for junk as it moves along. It of course moves in a very geometric and purposeful shape around the room, and the Bot Vac tends to pick up any remains that it may have dropped or missed along the way because of this, and intelligently cleans the room as it goes in a very fixed pattern. Once the Bot Vac finishes, a full 9.5 minutes later, it seems that it's the winner with only a single leaf left on the floor. While that seems great and all, emptying the contents of the bin in this case is what really proved to be the winner. The Roomba sucked up every single leaf into its dustbin, making for an easy and clean pickup in the end. The Bot Vac, however, seems to have nearly gotten half of the leaves stuck in its intake valve and brush, not only leaving a mess underneath the vacuum when I picked it up, but also a good handful of leaves inside under the dustbin once I picked it up. The Roomba literally cleaned up house in this particular test, and it's actually quite surprising to see just how that happened too. Now for our 5th test, which is a little more specific to a space in the house, particularly in those pesky corners. First, we tried to dump a quarter cup of dirt in the corner here, but it simply proved to be too difficult for either vacuum, and at the end of the day seemed a little bit ridiculous of an idea in the first place, so we decided to go with something a little more, domestic, like Chex cereal. We placed a healthy half-cup portion near and in the corner of the room, as it's likely if you've got kids you've probably found an errant piece of food, or maybe 12, lying about just waiting to attract all sorts of lovely critters into your dwelling. Those ones in the corner are a particular nuisance, and it's here that we would assume the Neato Bot Vac Connected's D-shaped design would be better formulated to grab those pieces in the corner, since round shapes like the Roomba don't exactly fit well in triangular corners. At first, the Neato sounded like it would suck up everything in one fell swoop once it made its way to the corner of the room, but even so, it ended up picking up all but 5 pieces and some tiny crumbs in the end, all of which were still in the corner where they started. The Roomba, on the other hand, primarily uses its large side brush to grab things out of corners and fling them back into the place where that centrally located brush and suction of the Roomba can properly grab them. Something as light and airy as checks, however, proves to be a task too much for the heavy hand the side brush deals, and nearly half of all checks ended up in random places in the room. Ironically enough, it completely cleared all the checks out of the corner of the room, but ended up throwing them under the couch in the opposite corner of the test environment instead. The Roomba loses quite handily here, and it wasn't for the reason that we initially expected either. This final test involves carpet, which many people seem to be getting rid of nowadays. Carpet by nature is much harder to clean for obvious reasons, so why not dump half a cup of sand into it and see which one can suck up the most? For this test, we made sure to sift the dirt twice to remove any extra particles that might have made their way in, so all you've got here is a half cup of natural Florida sandy soil dug deep into that Berber carpet. As expected, the Neato moves around the corners first and makes multiple passes inward, alternating lines to make sure it gets everything that's scattered about. It takes quite a few passes, however, to even see much of a difference in the amount of dirt on the carpet, and by the end it's still pretty obvious where the dirt was poured for the test. For this particular test, we wanted to make sure to measure just how much dirt was picked up by each vacuum, as the large particles or piles of stuff in the previous tests on tile obviously won't exist on this type of carpet. Dumping the contents of the Botvac's dustbin into a measuring cup shows that it picked up about half of what was poured on the ground, which equates to about a quarter cup of dirt, in addition to a few extra particles that it picked up in the carpet. It took about 10 minutes for the Botvac to complete this test, and it did so with only about 50% accuracy. This is also on the default turbo mode for reference, just so there's no wondering about any lack of suction because of the eco mode setting. Moving on to the Roomba now gives us some pretty wildly different results. On its first pass through the middle of the dirt area, we found that the Roomba visibly lifts almost all of the dirt, and it does so for a number of reasons. First off, that dirt sensor was rightfully tripped, causing the Roomba to run over a single section multiple times before it felt it was clean enough to move on. We saw this in the previous dirt test, but it's even more exacerbated here. Secondly, the Roomba actually will automatically adjust its suction level depending on whether it detects a hard or soft surface, in this case upping it to the maximum suction since it's on carpet. These things all combine to mean it just plain cleans better in this particular scenario, especially where tight navigation or obstacles aren't concerned. In the end, the half cup of dirt was almost completely picked up, measuring about 90% or so of all dirt cleaned up by the Roomba. This is a huge win for iRobot, and it shows just how much of a difference that extra suction and dirt detection can make. In the end, which vacuum is best? Well, that seems to be entirely dependent on what sort of surfaces your house has and what sorts of messes you usually make. If you've got lots of carpet, leaves, or dirt, it seems that the Roomba 980 does the best job of actually picking up these messes over what the Botvac was able to. On the flip side, if you've got more obstacles to navigate around, whether it be furniture or toys, the Botvac Connected seems like the better pick. In the end, though, there's still a very hefty price difference between the two, as the Botvac Connected is $200 cheaper, and while it's definitely got some better software on both the internal navigation front and the actual app you interface with, the Roomba 980 seems to do a better job of cleaning the places it can actually reach, which may mean that it has better value for you. We hope you enjoyed this in-depth video and invite you to check out our other videos here on YouTube and Facebook. Be sure to check us out on Google+, Twitter, Instagram, and at the site. Wherever you're at, we're at. And of course, don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more of our updates and content. And as always, until next time.